What you do is amazing, and we truly want to do all we can, not just with our grants and funds, but also with resources and with connecting you with potential board members and making sure your organization has as much as we can offer to help you be successful. Speaking of grants, I do want to make sure that everybody knows that our spring grant cycle is now open. Um, the grants are all done online at the Arkansas Community Foundation, arcf.org. You can go there, and the application process is all online. It closes on February 15th, and we hope to have our final decision in March for awarding those grants. So if anybody has questions about that, you can certainly send me an email or reach out, and we'll go from there. I'm going to share my screen and just go through. I get to do the boring part, which are kind of the legalistic nuts and bolts. This session is usually a lot longer, and I go through a lot more. Leslie's going to send out the full packet of information. Everything I have is in a Word document, so I think that's important. Then you can take it, you can adapt it for your board and what might fit, and use it that way. I'm only going to go through a couple of handouts and really just to lay the groundwork as we move into the panel discussion, where I think the real meat and good information comes from the great experienced people that we have on that panel. So I am going to share my screen here. I think I am. Okay. Okay, hope that everybody can see that? And really, this volunteer service that board members do is really about finding your place, matching what you're passionate about, what your board members are passionate about, with the mission and the programs of your organization. So you have, board members have kind of three main duties, legal duties. And like I said, this is the kind of nuts and bolts kind of thing. You have a duty of care, and that care means that your board members, and if you're a board member, that you actively participate in the organization's planning and decision making so that you're making sound and informed decisions. So that's kind of what the duty of care is all about. The duty of loyalty means that when you're sitting as that board member and representing that organization, that you put all other interests aside. And so many board members of your board members may serve on multiple boards, but when they are sitting in your board meeting and talking about your organization, it's very important that that is their focus. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't bring some good information from their other experiences, and you should take advantage of that. But that decision-making process has to be that duty of loyalty for what you're there. It is really important that you are aware of any conflicts of interest within your organization. Having them doesn't mean you can't participate. It just means that the full board knows about it as you're making decisions and things like that. The last, the duty of obedience. Boy, that sounds kind of ominous a little bit there. But really, that just means that you're following all the state, local, federal laws. You pay payroll taxes if you have paid staff. Register with the Arkansas Secretary of State as a fundraiser. But the last little piece of it is that you are committed to the established mission. You know, when you become a nonprofit, you talk about what the mission of your organization is. And so we'll go through that a little bit too, and how important that is to stay kind of on top of that. There we go. Okay, so board members' responsibilities. And this is one of the documents that Leslie emailed out. It's got the title of 4 Principles of Nonprofit Governance. And that first one, you know, setting the organizational direction, is really making sure there is a clear vision for your organization. it is so easy to get sidetracked, get pulled down a rabbit hole into something that could be very worthwhile and very useful and maybe needed, but is it the right fit for your organization? And that's what a board is supposed to do, is to keep that focus, keep that direction headed that way. And it's also important because that's how you can evaluate your organization's program success. So if you're headed off in a slightly askew direction, it's not fair to evaluate your staff or your programs if that wasn't part of your mission. And so I think it allows you to keep that focus, especially because most of us have very limited resources. Okay, the next one is about providing oversight. And I think that this is important. Not that the board runs the organization, but you put some checks and balances in place to make sure that how your organization is being run correctly for things. And I'll use a couple quick examples. For example, most organizations require 2 checks or 2 signatures on a check before the checks are issued. So just some basic financial procedures that protect from theft or misuse or things like that. But it also, again, puts in some policies that can protect the clients that you serve and things like that. So you set that kind of overall scope umbrella of how the organization operates, and then the chief professional officer, the executive director, is the one who actually does the execution. And so that helps that person, whoever it is, to know what's expected. And I think that's another piece. Having been an executive director multiple times over the years, I think having those very clear expectations for the executive director is so important. The executive director reports to the board. All the rest of the staff report to the executive director. And so as a board, you don't go around the executive director to tell people what to do. You have to be the person that, or the board has to act as that kind of bigger picture, bigger oversight and direction. But for an executive director to be effective, they need that clear direction. Providing the necessary resources. I mean, obviously, there's a fundraising component to every nonprofit, and you as a board member needs to participate in that. Now, it doesn't mean you're the one going out to ask for money. What it means is you have a network of people. You can make those introductions. You can provide insight to whoever the executive director, if you have a fundraising staff, who that might be. Provide support and information for grant opportunities. Businesses who might want to support an organization that you believe in. So I think those are the areas that I think board members can help, along with always making a gift to your organization. Some organizations will have a set amount that a board member is expected to give. Others focus more on percent of giving. I think it's very valuable if you're fundraising out there to be able to say that every member of our board has made a gift because they believe in what we're doing. And so as a board member, that is a very reasonable expectation. And I think that's something that as you're recruiting new board members and bringing people in, I think that's really important to make clear on the front end with part of that. Be that informed voice. And it's kind of the outreach part of it, but outreach gives the implication of it being one way. Really, you need to be listening also to donors, to people in the community, to the clients that are served, and to the staff about what's going on. So it's really a two-way street of communication. I think that helps you make more informed decisions and to talk more carefully and more deliberately and I guess emphatically about the organization that you're supporting. Support a marketing and PR plan. Um, our next session in February is going to talk some about how can board members help with fundraising in particular. Then also we're going to have a panel of PR professionals, marketing and public relations professionals. We're really going to talk a lot about social media and what's effective, how to do it, how to put it together. And so I encourage you all to sign up for that one also. But you need to be that informed ambassador, and that's probably the best way to put it. Have your 3-minute elevator speech where you run into somebody and say, oh, you're on that board. What is that all about? And probably the best way to do that, the most effective way, is to talk about how you became involved. Why are you moved to be part of this organization and support it? Just telling that story can have that human connectedness. And I think that to me has been, I think the telling of that story, you know, how and why you became involved, I think is most meaningful to other people who may ultimately become supporters, donors, and maybe ultimately join the board moving forward. So here's a question. And this is actually, and there, that's the second handout, which just has a series of questions to it. You know, are you a good board member? And there's probably, what, about 12 or 15 questions. And I've been thinking a lot about this. And this would be a useful document to hand out to someone coming onto the board, because I think that gives them kind of an idea of expectations moving forward, and ways to help gauge their participation and their effectiveness as a board member. But it could also be something that could be handed out to the board every year, not to be filled out and turned in. You know, it isn't to, but to give your board members time for self-reflection. It doesn't mean they have to say yes to everything on here, because, you know, everybody has a life, everybody has different interests and different levels of participation that they can do. But I think that self-reflection, I'll go back to that phrase again, that self-reflection, I think, is really important individually and collectively for your boards. And so, you know, like I said, it's not to hand out, make people feel bad. You know, maybe it's not the right time for them to serve on the board. Maybe they would rather just be a volunteer for a particular program. That's okay. And I think you kind of help board members work through this process as we move forward. And I think the last two questions on that list, are you excited to be part of the board and the organization? And are you looking forward to your service as part of your future? You know, when you think about where you see yourself in the next 3 to 5 years as a board member, you know, does that organization come up as part of what you're doing? And again, it's just to give those individual board members kind of a chance to reassess. And so, you know, as I said, all of these things are in the packet that we'll email out to you as part of the evaluation. I'm happy to open it up for questions. Like I said, I'm trying to lay some of the groundwork before we move on here. Making sure board members, you know, one of the documents that I'll send out is a list of, here's some questions you should ask yourself before joining a board. Really taking a hard look at your time and time management. It's not just showing up to the board meeting. You know, most organizations have committees, have volunteer opportunities. Some are fun, some aren't. And really making sure that if you're an executive director, that you make it really clear to them. And I think that helps also with recruiting, because I think there's nothing worse than recruiting a board member to serve, and then you find out later that it's not a good fit for whatever reason, you know, and I think that could leave some bad feelings on both sides. So I'm going to put my contact information up there, but you know, as I said, Leslie can reach me. Most of you all know how to reach me anyways. And so I'll open it up for questions on my side, if there are any. If there aren't, that's fine too. And I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. Okay. One thing I will mention is that once you get the packet, if you would like, you know, a session for your board member that can be customized for your board, you know, you may be working on board recruitment, it may be fundraising, it may be you've got a lot of new board members and you want to make sure they know and understand. I go into a lot about the relationship between the executive director and the board and what's appropriate and what's not, mostly because I've been on both sides, and it can be a wonderful relationship, and that's what we want for our executive directors and for the boards, is to have that symbiotic relationship and really working well together. And so if anybody would like to schedule a board training, it could be part of a retreat, I'm happy to try to come and make that work. So. All right, well, if there are no questions, I am going to open it up to our panel, and I think they are all here. I have invited these individuals all actually serve on my local affiliate board, on the Arkansas Community Foundation's affiliate board, but every one of them serves on multiple boards or have served on multiple boards. And so I think they can bring a really unique perspective about their service. And then we're also going to have a short presentation. Dr. Charlotte Green is also going to talk about recruiting board members and the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion as you're looking to recruit new board members. So if my panel will unmute themselves. The panel, and I'm just going to say their names, and then they're going to kind of do their own introductions. They've got a series of questions. This is going to be a chance for you truly to ask them anything. And so I have Dawn Greenland and Jackie Wright, Charlotte Green, Aaron Knight, and Leslie Graybeal are all serving on the panel. So if you would unmute, and who wants to go first? Dawn, why don't you go first? You're our fearless leader at the state level also.
Thanks, Shelley, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me all right from the intergalactic headquarters of Nabholz, where I'm sitting. I was asked to introduce myself and talk about my nonprofit involvement. I've been with Nabholz organization for 36 years, and it's a very great organization to work for that promotes involvement in community. In fact, that's part of our purpose, is to grow our communities. I've been on lots of different boards over the years. Some of the past ones have been like Big Brothers Big Sisters, the Conway Symphony Orchestra, Conway Interfaith Clinic, of course, lots of different professional and industry associations that you don't want to hear about. And then my current board service includes the Boy Scouts, Quapaw Area Council, the Faulkner County Emergency Food and Shelter Board right here locally. I'm on the executive committee of the Nabholz Charitable Foundation. I'm a board member of the Community Foundation of Faulkner County, which is a local affiliate that Shelley is our director. And then I'm also currently the state chairman of the state board of the Arkansas Community Foundation, which is over all the affiliates in the state. My other connection is from time to time I get asked to facilitate retreats for like planning sessions for certain nonprofit boards. And I've done that a few times in the last few years. That's me.
I'll go next. My name is Jackie Wright, and I'm currently on the Arkansas Community Foundation Board here in Faulkner County. Some of the other boards that I'm on would be the Young Empower Sisters, which is a mentoring program here in Faulkner County. The Faulkner County Alliance on Aging, I serve on that board. And then I'm also a commissioner for the Conway Housing Authority. And I'm born and reared here in Conway, been here all my life. Always happy to help.
I'm Aaron Knight. As Don mentioned, I'm hailing from City Hall at 1111 Main Street, so we're both hanging out in downtown Conway. So I am the president of the UCA Alumni Association Board of Directors, on the UCA Foundation Board of Directors, our local affiliate board, and then just finished up my 8 years, which is a long time, as on the Conway Public Schools Foundation, 2 of which I was president. So.
Okay, I'll jump in next. I'm Charlotte Green. I'm on the Community Foundation Board. I'm also on, I serve on the CAPCA board here locally, and I'm on the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation Board currently. So those are the 3 boards that I am sitting on presently.
All right, and I'll finish up. Leslie Graybiel, on the Community Foundation board here in Faulkner County, and then I'm also on the Milestones board.
What's
Shelley,
next, Shelley?
the format? Yeah, how do you want us to proceed?
Yeah, so I think, I sent you all a few questions, and I think one of the ones that might be most meaningful to the people here is, do you wish you had known before you served on your first board? What are some of the things looking back you wish you had thought of to ask? Or
That's a great tee up. Thank you, Shelley. You're starting to go in robot mode. I don't know about your connection there. Would you like me to talk? Okay. Yeah, so what I wish I would have known before serving on various boards. This is all lessons from my own experience and bumps and bruises. The first one is really find out what the true time commitment is. Shelley touched on this. If you think about it, the normal recruiting technique that when you get the call is, oh, we only meet 10 times a year for 1 hour. Well, that's one fraction of the time commitment usually required to serve on a board. So you think about board meetings, committee meetings, some have regional and national conferences. You got to get trained up, and there's training programs. There's going to be events you've got to show up at and support. You got to prep for the meetings. How many emails are going to come across your desk that you have to read and prepare for? That's the first pointer I'd put out there, is really try to get a feel for the true time commitment so you can make a firm commitment to really give it all you have. The second point I wanted to make is try to figure out how mature, I use the word mature because boards have a life, from infancy all the way to, passing away. But how mature and organized is the particular board? Do they have their guiding principles in place, like mission and values and things like that? Do they start and stop meetings on time? Do they send out an agenda in advance with content for you to read and prepare? Do they actually follow the agenda during the meeting? Are they having appropriate discussions and making good decisions? Are they rehashing the topics over and over and over again and never getting any traction? Or are you sitting in a board meeting licking and sticking envelopes instead of doing really important board work? Do they have accurate financial reports and financial statements that you can rely upon so you can have that fiduciary responsibility? Do they have clear responsibilities for officers and their committees? And are they filled? And are they doing their work? And do they have succession planning to fill those officers in the future? Those are all things that I would try to figure out how to judge before I made a commitment. Now, bear in mind, if you have a young board that's not quite as organized, they still need good board members, but it's a different skill set to help them become more mature and become more organized and have more structure. So it takes a certain kind of skill set that you may or may not have to offer. Of course, a strong board is just the opposite. It requires a different skill set so you can plug in and really have an impact with a well-run board. So my ultimate recommendation is test drive a board before you join. By all means, ask to join as a guest for a few meetings and really pay attention to these things that I mentioned before you agree to serve. That's what I'd offer up for things I wish I'd have known before I sat on a board.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in on the tail end of that because I'm not sure that Shelley and Don haven't said everything I had notes for, but I'll just kind of add to the understand the commitment. I think, and I'm saying everything today, knowing I am guilty of having done it myself and trying to recruit people, is you minimize in your head what that commitment really looks like, and people get into it and they go, oh, this seems more than those 10 meetings you were talking about. So I think that as we are recruiting folks for boards, we have to give an honest assessment of what that commitment looks like and let them understand if it's the right fit. We have a tendency to not want to get rejected, so we don't want them to say no. So we downplay those commitments, and then they get in and go, this is more than I can really handle. And to Shelley's point, you can create some bad feelings that way. And so I think that's really important. I think the other thing that I don't know if it's maybe that I wished I'd known, but that I think much more about now than I did is we minimize the ask of making a gift as a board member, right? It's another one of those things we kind of, and you need to give something, and we kind of move on past it. But I think that when you're recruiting folks, if you're looking at whether they have a true connection to the mission and purpose of the organization, giving shouldn't be a challenge. Now, if you're just picking people out of thin air and saying, hey, they might be a board member, or they might be a board member, then that may be a little harder. But if people buy into what the organization is doing, into the mission, it shouldn't be difficult to ask them to give, and we just don't need to be bashful about it. We just need to kind of lay it out there. And I tell this story a lot in our community foundation board, but obviously serving on several boards, you get asked several different ways. And with the community foundation, I had a call to my office from Charlie Nabholz, and I was out to lunch or something. And I came in and my project manager said, hey, Charlie Nabholz called. What do you suppose he wants? And I said, it doesn't matter what he wants. I'm going to say yes. So that's how I got to be on this board. But, that's kind of counterintuitive to what I'm telling you, but I think it's important to know. And I knew and had familiarity with community foundations. Obviously, I was happy to do that. But we don't, if everybody walked into a board in that same sort of manner, they wouldn't have an expectation of what was going on. And I think that's really important to make sure that fits there. And I'll give you a real world example. Somebody that I helped recruit along with some other folks to a board that sort of the strategic direction changed, and it didn't align with what their expectations were initially of joining and why they joined. And so they decided to step away. And I think that's okay too, is when there isn't that congruence of fit, then they've got to be, you'd rather not have a disgruntled board member. You'd rather have somebody that could be honest and just say, I think it's probably best that I step away and maybe I'll serve in a smaller, more limited capacity or whatever. But not being bashful about the true commitment or the desire that we need your support as a board member, period, are two things that I would say. And the other thing, I guess, thirdly and lastly, is don't assume that they know more than they do. As far as how your board or how your organization operates, what all your organizations do. All of it, and I'm looking at my former colleague Jennifer at United Way. United Way does a lot of things, and a lot of people sort of have a thought about, oh, they do this, but they really do a lot more than that. And so I think knowing, don't assume that they know what you do. Make sure that you're clear about that. I think also helps in a way. And I think there's a question or a comment in the chat.
Yeah, there's just a quick
Okay.
question about what the typical duration of a term is. And I think that depends on your bylaws. Most commonly, what I see are 3 years with, what kind of subsequent terms you're allowed to have. But I think, again, that goes back to that oversight and making sure that that's clearly defined and that it's used. I think to Don's point, do you have an agenda and do you follow it? Well, do you have bylaws and do you follow them? And so,
Borrow a joke from Bunny Adcock, some boards are like Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave, right? And so knowing what those terms are a very important thing. So.
And Shelley, I also wanted to add on that, because that was one of the things I was going to say, is to look at the commitment in terms of how long you're on the board, because I'm much more likely to join a board if I'm finishing out someone else's term and it's like a year or 2 years, so I can get a feel for the board, as opposed to a 5-year commitment. Because like with the Housing Authority, it's a 5-year commitment. That's a huge commitment if you don't know the inner workings of the organization. I also had a funny story too, because I forgot I'm on the board of governors at Hendrix College. I went to school there, And it reminded me that when I got out of law school, the law school asked me to be on like their alumni board. And I was just floored. And I was like, sure. And it was at the second meeting that I realized that there was $1,000 commitment from each board member every year. And I was a brand new public defender. So you can imagine what that meant for my pocketbook. But it worked out. We worked it out. We got through it. But it is very important to kind of ask those difficult questions like, how much money do you expect from board members every year? And how much real time are you spending in meetings? I have one board where we're supposed to meet quarterly. And last year for 2 months, we met every week. So you need to know if that's going to happen, because if you have another job and you're very busy in your other job, then that kind of, it adds up. It can be very, very stressful.
I'll jump in here. I see that the question about mentoring, that's something on Arkansas Imagination Library. I'm actually executive director of that organization. And that's something that we do for our board members. When a new board member comes on, we connect them with someone that's already there. And it really works nicely. So that the mentor is a good thing. It's also a good way for them to ask questions one-on-one that they may not feel comfortable about asking questions in a group setting. The thing that I would offer in thinking about serving boards, and I don't know that this is something that would fall into the category of I would change. It's just something that I've learned along the way. And that is the whole part about commitment. The term commitment is a relative thing. A commitment in one setting is not necessarily commitment in another setting if it's something that resonates with you. If I'm serving on a board that I'm really not interested in, attending a 30-minute meeting one time a year would be a lot for me, because it's just not, it's hard to invest time, everybody. And if you're on this call, then you're probably busy people. We all only have so many hours of a day. So I would say connect and serve on boards that connect with who you are. And if it's something that resonates with who you are, then I believe your gift makes room for you. You will find that you can put more time and commitment in things because it's a part of who you are. So that would be the one thing that I would say is make sure, yes, learn about the board and all those different things, but also know what resonates with you. And then you will be a benefit to the board because you're going to be able to bring your full self to the organization. And then the commitment is not going to be taxing because it's something that you're gifted in.
Yeah, I just want to say that, Charlotte. Oh, sorry, I've got kind of an echo. To say that I think one of the things that I think that I like to know is what the executive director sees as my contribution. So, you know, the organization means something to me and resonates with me, as you said. But, you know, what is it that the executive director or the board chair feels that I'm contributing specifically, so that, you know, I can make sure to really like nurture that and contribute that if it's something that's expected of me. And one of the things that I'll share with everybody after the meeting as part of the packet of handouts that Shelley was talking about, that Shelley has, is a board member job description. And so that's a great way to set expectations, you know, so executive directors have that board member job description, and, you know, board members ask for that board member job description so that those expectations are really clear. And it's a good jumping off point for discussions about those different expectations and any expectations that, you know, there may be a concern about. And the only other thing that I would add, you know, to what everyone else has said here, is just that one of the things that I didn't realize when first getting into board service was just how much my perspective as an individual board member was valued. And I think, especially when you're new to a board, you want to kind of sit back and listen and just see how it goes. But to just not be afraid to really jump in and be a full participant in a board once you've established those expectations. Because at the end of the day, a 3-year commitment on a board isn't really that long in kind of the grand scheme of our lives. And I feel like 3 years is just over before you know it. I have an almost 3-year-old daughter, and I just feel, it's just over in the blink of an eye. And so, in year 1 of board service, to realize how much your perspective is valued as a board member, how much your talents and what you can contribute to that board is valued, and to just contribute, everything that you can, and to not be shy about it.
It really does my heart good to hear all of you talk about, that finding your place. The place is not just the organization, but it's actually your place within the board. And to Leslie's point, not everybody is a financial wizard. Not everybody is a social media person. Not everybody is comfortable asking for money. But you were asked to come on the board. And I think when we talk more about recruiting new board members, you were brought on for a reason. There was a gap, there was a skill set that was needed to complement the rest of the board. And I think that's the thoughtful discussion that the board has to have as you then go out and look for potential new board members. We had a question come up, and Aaron, I'm actually thinking of you to answer this question. It says, like to hear an experience about board members who served during the absence of an executive director and any lessons learned during that period. So sure. I know Aaron has served on a board with that.
Yeah, so the Conway Public Schools Foundation was founded in 2007, and we did not get an executive director until last year. So it's been an entirely volunteer-driven board during the entirety of that. So yeah, I think the question's a little different, but I think the answer is relatively the same. We didn't lose a board or an executive director in the sense, but we didn't have one. And so I think the two things that I'll say is this: number one, and I don't know that I was especially good at this, is realize you can't do it all yourself. You have to find ways to delegate and plug people into the right places. And sometimes there were little things that didn't come up to me as important, but then when somebody didn't fill that gap, you realize how important they were. So I think it's about fully appreciating the totality of the work and making sure that you bring enough people in to engage in doing that work. It's something that, and Shelley's aware of this, been present to see this, like our board for the Public School Foundation really did that well. We did it well inherently. It didn't feel forced. People just kind of figured out where they jumped in and knew what to do. So I think that's number one, is don't try to take on too much of it yourself. Make sure that you're bringing the right folks in. The other thing I'll say, and this one's not a popular thing to say, but it also means you've got to limit the scope of what you do, because you can't do everything well. You have to acknowledge the capacities of your humanness, right? And that you can only achieve so many things in a set period of time. And this is not your full-time job. You're doing this out of the passion and out of the goodness of your heart. So I think that would be the other thing, is not allowing, scope creep. If your mission is this and you have this event that you do really well and you have to execute it, make sure that's your top priority. Don't add 5 other things in the absence of the support system of having a staff person, if that's what you're used to. Or in our case, where we were totally volunteer driven, we kept it to a very confined set of things that we did really well. And now that they have an executive director, that has well expanded. And I think that's appropriate. But if you don't have that mechanism, make sure that the things that you can do, prioritize them and do them well. Don't take on too much.
Yeah, Murphy's Law in that situation is the executive director resigns when you're board chairman. That's the rule. So I've experienced that twice, and to me it puts a lot of pressure on the executive committee of the board, the president and the officers, because they have to step up and take on all the executive director responsibilities until a new one can be put in place. But with good leadership, you're able to go through that, like Aaron said, minimize the new things. Be really good at keeping the light bill paid and serving the clients that you have. At the same time, quickly interviewing and hiring the right fit for the next director. But it puts more pressure on the officers than it does on the rest of the board.
I'd like to, I'll share just a quick story, and this goes back to years ago, well before Jennifer being executive director of United Way, and after I was. But an executive director left very abruptly and under not good circumstances. But what I saw is a board that was prepared to step up. And it was actually a colleague of Don's, Andrea Woods, who I think was chair of the board at the time. And they immediately, came together, the executive committee came together, said, we have to be clear and upfront about what's happened. We have to fix it so it doesn't happen again. And we have to move forward and keep this organization going. And they did. And it was really inspiring, as bad as it was, the news, what you saw was a board that worked well together. And I think that's what everybody wants is, whether you're celebrating wonderful good things and programs, or you have a catastrophe happen like COVID, it's kind of been our nemesis this past year. But you see the board come together and figure out how to make it work. So I think that was a very inspiring time for me to see how they handled those things. I'm going to go back to the panel with a question of what do you think it takes? What does it mean to you to be a good board member? And that's a pretty broad, and you've all kind of alluded to some traits perhaps and some other things, but what does it mean to you?
They be engaged.
Yeah, I think, Leslie sort of touched on this, understanding what your contribution can be. I think too many people join a board and they're paralyzed. Oh, I don't know anything about the way this works. I don't want to jump in. I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but just quickly figuring out what your contribution can be, because it is valued. You don't sit there and think that, oh, I don't have anything to say on that topic. Figure out where your expertise and knowledge lie and how that lines up with something that they're working on, and just contribute. Don't be afraid to step in. I think there are such things, dumb questions. I promise I've asked them. And most people are pretty gracious about not laughing too hard when you do, but ask them. I mean, just step out there, because that's the only way you'll learn. And funny, back to my first year on the Community Foundation board, had worked with the Community Foundation through the Public School Foundation, so had a familiarity, but had only a familiarity with a small piece of it. And so our first board retreat was trying to understand how to explain what the Community Foundation was. And that's more of a chore than you might imagine, because it's very multifaceted, but not being afraid to be like, wait, I don't understand that. Could you tell me that again? And, and then figure out how I can add value to those efforts.
Jackie, lay some wisdom on us.
Oh,
You look ready.
they've said everything I was going to say just about, but I mean, I think basically to have a voice. Don't be afraid to use your voice, because just because you know something doesn't mean everyone else knows it. So don't be afraid to use your voice, but also be understanding and realize that it's a committee. So you're not always going to get your way, or what happens is not always going to be what you want to happen. But the whole point of it is to voice your thoughts, voice your concerns, voice what you want to happen, and to talk it out with your colleagues. Because the great thing about these boards is that whether it's a board of 4 or a board of 14, everybody's there because they want to do what's best for that organization. And so, just learn how to compromise, but also keep your voice.
Jackie reminded me of something in that, saying that to what Shelley mentioned, a past situation that was very difficult. I think, being prepared to compromise within the scope of the work, and that you won't always get your way, but don't ever allow yourself to find in a position to compromise what you believe to be ethical or not. I mean, that's a lot of times, either out of ignorance or not wanting to rock the boat, people will just let stuff slide by. And I think in the example that Shelley was giving earlier, I think that was kind of the case. There may have been some signs to things that people just kind of glossed over. And so to that point, do be willing to step up if something isn't lining up with what you believe to be ethically correct, as well. I think that is we may not necessarily in every board have a fiduciary responsibility, but a lot of us do. And we don't talk about that a lot as board members, but it is probably something that needs to be in the back of our minds, is if we see something, we have an obligation to step out and say, I don't think that's right. I'm not comfortable with where this is going, and kind of go from there.
And I think the perspective a new board member can bring can be so valuable. And Jackie, I'm going to call you out because you're a relatively new board member for us, but you immediately brought to our attention organizations we had never heard of at the Community Foundation. And whether or not they get funded, or whether, that's the importance of having that seat at the table and bringing that up, because, as much as board members try to be everywhere, or executive directors try to be aware of what's going on, you can't know everything. And I think that to me is one of the most valuable things I think board members can do.
Kelly, that's a good point. I'd add to that new board members can ask all the right questions and not get in trouble for it. It's like you're on the honeymoon. Because nonprofits fall in love with their service offering, even though they're not that effective. And a new board member can come and say, now, why do we do this? And what kind of results are we getting? And should we continue to do this? And new board members can really raise those questions freely. And that's another reason they're wonderful to bring onto a board. If I could just add a few other tidbits, you guys have covered a lot of them about being a good board member. To me, it's always about giving the T3, right? It's when you're in your sweet spot and you feel like you want to give all your time, all your talent, all your treasure to an organization, that feels good. And it's a very positive experience. So the T3 to me is always what I'm looking for. And then also being a good board member means you don't cross the line and get into that domain of the executive director, their staff, and their business, and getting in the middle of all their processes and systems and things like that. You got to hold your one employee accountable for those things, and that is the executive director. But I've seen situations where people go around and talk and get involved and put their nose in places where really it creates a huge issue for the organization. So good board members know that line, and they don't cross that line, and they stay in their lane, bro. And that's a good practice. To me, ultimately, you want good board members to bring their energy and bring that positive attitude. These nonprofit folks are working their tails off, especially through the pandemic, and they get down and they get exhausted and they get tired. Coming into a board meeting of positive, can-do people can be a huge uplift to a nonprofit organization. So I always bring that positive attitude.
Mm-hmm.
To add to that, Don, talking about those 3 T's and that time and talent and treasure, to me, it helps to think about my life holistically, and to think about all the different aspects of my life, personal and professional, that I'm contributing as a board member. Because it's kind of, for me, counterintuitive, because I think we get so much messaging about work-life balance and trying to draw lines and boundaries and separate things. And I think being a good board member is actually the opposite of that. It's trying to bring all the aspects of your life and your the things that you care about, and your professional talents and expertise, and your connections, personal and professional. It's bringing all those things together to just figure out, how do I best serve this organization in all of those areas.
We need to video that. That was awesome.
He is recording it. We can play it for the board meeting next month. So to our board member panelists, can you recall, and this was not a question I gave you, so this is one that's just popped into my head. So if you all look at me dumbfoundedly, I'll deserve it. When was the time when you first joined a board that you felt comfortable stepping up and maybe suggesting something radically new and different? Did you ever do that as part of board service? Because some people join a board and think, oh, I'm going to get in, we're going to change everything. Well, good luck with that. But And then you have the other extreme. I'm going to sit here quietly until 6 months till I'm done, and then I might say something. So, how do you find that balance? When do you know enough to say something?
So I'm directly in the middle of that always. I will suggest it, but I'm never comfortable doing it. And I think that's okay. I think you should do it anyway, basically. But every time I do it, I second guess myself. I'll text somebody else on the board and say, did that sound too harsh, or was that too in your face, or was that okay? What do you think? Like, I always second guess myself. But again, it's about having a voice. And just because you make a suggestion doesn't mean that's going to happen. But there's nothing wrong with making a suggestion, even if it seems outlandish and crazy. Yeah, so I'm right. I'm always in the middle. I'll do it, but I don't like doing it.
I think that, go ahead.
The 3-year term comes to mind, and I really like that 3-year term, because for me, traditionally, year 1 has been the learning year. Just understand the organization, understand what they do, understand how you fit in, understand committees, all those things. Question, but you're questioning to learn. Year 2 is the do and change and really get immersed in what they're doing. Year 3 is when you lead. That's when you step up in committee leadership or vice president of this or whatever. So that 3-year term is really important. And I've found in my experience, that's pretty much been the way it goes.
It depends on the board, Don. It's lead or leave, one of the two.
Yeah.
You're checking out. No, I think that, one of the strategies that I employed, not the least of which with the Community Foundation, but especially in the early days of the Public School Foundation, with Community Foundation, Don was actually assigned to me as kind of a mentor. And so if I had a question, I'd just go ask Don and kind of filter my idea through somebody that had been there. And so with the Public School Foundation, when I jumped in there, I was at UCA, worked for Shelley, worked with Jennifer at UCA, had all these ideas that were very relatable to what we could do at the Public School Foundation. So believe in copying and stealing everything. And so instead of me being the one necessarily to put all those ideas out there, Arch Jones had been on the board. He was a vice president, was a good friend of mine. I kind of floated him all through Arch and let him sort of test send up the test balloons on that. And once I got a comfortable footing that, hey, my ideas aren't as crazy as I think they are, then I would jump out there a little bit. But that's one strategy that I've employed, is just kind of finding a seasoned person on the board and filtering some of those through them initially so that you get your footing. And then once you know where your balance is, then you kind of jump out there and take on the challenge.
I was going to say, thank you all very much. A number of our panelists have kind of alluded to this about, the skill set and coming to the table. And I think one key important activity of a good board is that recruiting of new board members. Mm-hmm. And it's, you can look at just general demographic information. Do we have enough people? We here at the Community Foundation look at things like geographically. Do we have somebody who represents Bologna? Faulkner County is a big county. How does that fit? I think, again, it brings a different perspective. I think you also need to look at skill sets needed based on where your organization is. Are you getting ready to do a capital campaign? Are you, as Don, I think, alluded to, are you a mature organization or young, new, starting up? Those need different skill sets. The Community Foundation at the statewide level is going through a strategic planning process. And what has kind of come out of that process, and it's not done yet, but that embracing of diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that is really resonating with all of the affiliates, and I think all of the staff and boards across the state. And so Charlotte Green has done some great presentation, research, information, challenging us to kind of look at that. And so I've asked Charlotte just to share a little bit about that approach, because I think when you're looking to recruit new board members, I think you need to kind of open that lens a little wider than you may have looked before. So Charlotte, we're going to kind of let you talk a little bit more about recruiting.
Okay, so real quick, I'll just understanding that when we talk about recruitment and having a solid board, it goes beyond just recruitment. like when we recruit, we think about getting them at the table. But if you think about the conversations that we've been having in this setting, it's about people being engaged in the board, and just recruitment alone does not equal engagement to the board. And so, I can share, can I, Shelley? Yeah, I think I
Yes,
can.
yes, I think you can.
Can y'all see that?
You're getting ready. Yep, you're good.
Okay. So basically, it's just this one slide that I'm going to share with you is diversity, belonging, inclusion, and equity. Just to give you and think through all four of these as we bring people to serve on our board. So that diversity stage, that's just like the recruitment. Shelley kind of alluded to that in regards to making sure you have the different perspectives. But on this picture I have, you see I have sugar, salt, and pepper. You guys see my little shakers down there. And I have that there because sometimes we just look at things, we just have a check, right? So if I'm baking a cake, I don't know if you all are bakers, but I use this analogy about baking a cake. And when you bake a cake, you have all these ingredients, right? So who can tell me something that you put in a cake? What do you have? Can any of y'all cook? What can you have?
Flour.
Flour. What else?
Eggs.
Eggs. What else?
Sugar, sugar.
Sugar. I think I'll eat it. What else?
Flavor.
Flavors. Yeah, I like lemon. I like lemon flavor. So you have all these different things, and we have them to bake the cake. But and we can call that diversity to a certain extent. These are the things we have to bake our cake. But we can be diverse from a measurable standpoint, but not diverse from an understanding standpoint. And truly, we want to be able to understand why we need to have an egg. Why do I have to have the sugar? Why do I need flour to bake a cake? Like, is it really necessary? And and the danger of not doing that is that, and goes back to my picture, you have salt and sugar. Well, salt and sugar it looks kind of alike, right? I can pour salt in a sugar thing and it could mess you up because you'll just start putting it right on your oatmeal and then you'll be mad. Or who wants 3 cups of salt in a cake, right? So the reason why I have that is in diversity, I want us to think about when we move to these boards and thinking about who's going to join our team, really get to know the people, like understand the difference between salt and sugar. It's very critical that we don't have this eagle's view of diversity, that we understand it's more than just a number. Yes, I have gender, yes, I have race, but what do they bring to the table? Why do I need that perspective at my table? Because if you don't do that, then you can't do the second one. The second one is belonging. That's creating a welcome situation across differences. So does the sugar feel like they need to be a part of the recipe? Or they're like, oh, I'm just here. They really don't need me. I'm just on the check off. If they could make this cake without sugar, I would not be in the recipe. Like, how does the sugar and salt feel? Like, do they understand their place? We talked about how we want people to contribute. A lot of times in boards, people don't contribute because the board as a whole, the people that are already there, they don't do the work of belonging. And people know when they're just asked to be on a board, just to check off, to have that, whatever, if it's gender, race, or if it's job description, they know if they're there, you can be diverse and not necessarily have your people to contribute. So make sure that you're intentionally about doing things to make them feel belong. And if they feel like they belong, then they'll contribute. And that's when you get to inclusion. You can't have inclusion without belonging. And this whole equity has a big word. People are talking about it. And there's some divisiveness with it. People, you get pushback on inclusion when you just jump into inclusion and haven't done the work of diversity and belonging. So when people feel like they belong, when we have all these different perspectives at the table, now you can hear the different perspectives and you understand, oh, that's why we do this in policies and procedures. Oh, that's why I've never heard of that organization. You start hearing people make contribution, and then that's how you move to equity. So like real quick, the diversity, belonging, inclusion, and equity, it's like, to me, it's a roadmap. You can't get equity is that's what we want to achieve on in all of our organizations. But if we don't think about the different people and the different perspectives that we have to have initially when we're thinking about board recruiting, then we're not going to have the people at the table. And then once we get them at the table, what are we doing to make sure they know, hey, I want you here. I just don't want you here in name. I want to hear what you have to say. And then once we get them to the point where they know, then they'll contribute. Then they'll talk. Then they'll be engaged. Then they'll speak up and hear the things that we need for them to say so we can have a cake. That's why I have a picture of a cake there, because we're going for the cake. We just don't want a bunch of ingredients. Who wants, now I like raw cookie dough, but it's not safe to eat. We have to, there's a purpose for all of this, right? So that you get to that purpose when you do inclusion, and then that's how you get to equity. So just when you're thinking about your boards and recruitment, think about equity and think about taking diversity, belonging, and inclusion to get to that path. Did I take care of that for you, Shelley?
You did, and I think you touch on something, and I think Leslie did too when she was talking, is when you come to a board, you are bringing your life experiences. And I think many times we all make assumptions about, those first assumptions when you see or meet people. And what is so important is that getting to know each other. And to your point, I really liked what you said about recruitment isn't engagement. You need to get to know the people, and they need to get to know you, again, telling the story, why are you serving on that board, to bring you in as you're now one of us. The us becomes the bigger pool, the better cake. With that, I agree with Lauren. I like the cake analogy a lot.
That was great, Charlotte. I want to add too how hard that is for nonprofit boards that meet 1 hour, get in, get out. That's why those retreats are so important, to carve out a day or a half a day on a weekend, because to become friends and familiar with one another is so hard to do in a structured board setting. It's before and after the board, it's on the retreat. So a good board will build time to get to know one another and appreciate one another. And often it's overlooked, like Charlotte said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure many of you, if you brought a brand new board member on during the pandemic, it is a struggle to get them to feel part, and how to connect them. I've tried to connect them with a couple of our older board members, but there is so much value to that relationship building before and after the board meetings start, where you just visit, you just, sit next to somebody you've not been next to before. And again, I think that life experience that you get to hear about is so very important. So
I'll add one more thing, and this is to Dawn said, some organizations are mature and toward the end, right? And I think there's a recognition too if you've overstayed your welcome on a board. I know that's not a very popular thing to talk about, but and I'll say that maybe I'm the one. If you don't know who it is, it's probably you, right? On the Public School Foundation that stayed too long. But I've never been in an organization where that's been the case, but you certainly hear those stories of board members that just hang on too long. So also know when your shelf life has expired and it's time to move on and find something else to turn your time, attention, and talents towards. We don't talk about that much, but I do think it's worth mentioning that you do run your course as a board member. You just can't, you don't have anything new to offer. You're just holding the seat, and sometimes it's an ego thing. Sometimes it's just out of a sense of obligation. You don't want to let anybody down, but there is a point where it's okay to step away and to venture on to different things too. None of you executive directors have ever had that board member, have you? No. Yes.
Any other words of wisdom from our panelists? Charlotte always does such a great job, and I so appreciate how you bring us into your thoughts. You know, I mean, I can feel what you're, I can feel what you're saying. And I think that should be true too, as you welcome new board members, and look for new board members for ones that fit. I'll kind of open it up to the panelists just to see if there's anything else you are just itching to share. You know, is there one thing you think that if you had to say, if there's just one attribute, one activity, one thing that makes you a good board member, is there anything that kind of rises to the top, is the cream of what you're doing? These guys are all good board members, by the way. They actually respond to emails. If there are board members on here, please, if an executive director emails you, they really do want you to reply.
I'll tell on myself because I forgot to set my alarm clock last Thursday and overslept the board meeting. And I woke up to 4 texts from Shelly, and the 4th one was finally, "Are you alive? Are you okay?" And so, you know, a great part is making sure you show up for the meetings because decisions are made by those people that show up, right? So, and I do apologize for missing it, but
We signed you up. Don't worry, you're signed up for all of it.
Yes, and that's the other part. Volunteer those people for everything, right?
Yeah, and I think not to continue picking on you, Aaron, but I think show up like can also be more broad in this sense, right? So showing up in person to the meetings where it's the basic expectation that you'll be there, but also, you know, showing up to the other events that the nonprofit has going on, and showing up in a pinch when somebody's needed, you know, just being that person who shows up. Just a lot of it is really showing up.
I'd also point out that I don't want to speak on behalf of Shelly and other executive directors, but rarely do they get meaningful feedback on their performance that's healthy and helps them learn and improve and become better. And that can be a really good niche for board members to, in a polite way, say, "Are you open maybe to some feedback?" And because where are they going to get it if not from the board of directors? In most boards, it's up to the president or the chairman to provide some sort of performance review. He's got a very limited, or she's got a limited perspective. And that's a real gift you can give your director, is feedback on for improvement, what they do great and what they could maybe focus on to improve.
And having that built in as part of the regular oversight, you know, so it's not 3 years in and now you're worried about something. You know, it's just part of the regular operating things. It could be all glowing and that's wonderful. But it could also be, you know, we really do think we need to, you know, not do this as much and do more of this. And as an executive director, that is really important to feeling like you're being effective.
It's okay to tell them you're limited to 1 email per week.
I'm pretty good about that now. I
You're
don't.
very good about that.
But
I'm
if I
not good.
text you, I mean you to answer right now. No. Well, are there any other questions from anybody who's participating? I mean, you have a wealth of knowledge and experience with these board members. I think any one of them would be willing to come visit with your board about what they've done and experienced and kind of challenge them. Sometimes having somebody come from the outside saying all the exact things that an executive director has already said, but saying it from somebody different and outside the organization can kind of perk up their ears a little bit.
That's why consultants make good money.
Yep.
They come in and tell you what you already know and charge you premium per page.
No questions? You guys have been wonderful to show up on an afternoon and let us do our modified presentation here. As Leslie said, I know she's going to send out an evaluation and send out lots of materials. You can reach out to any of us. Please, if you're going to apply for grants, get out there. If you have any questions getting in or filling out the grant proposals, just let me know. I'm happy to help. Leslie, is there any closing remarks you have on behalf of UCA?
Just that there is a part 2 of this series, which will be 2 weeks from today, same time, also on Zoom, but not the same exact place. There's a different link, but sort of the same place. So if you are interested in that, it's more focused on engaging board members in donor development and fundraising type of work. So we'll have some great speakers and panelists for that as well. So again, that's open to both the nonprofit leaders and staff, as well as board members and folks who are just interested in learning more about board service. So we hope to see many of you there.
Thank you, everybody.